on crypto purchases in the first 30 days. Download the Crypto.com app and get $25 with the code LAURA. Link in the description. Today's guest is Do Kwon, co-founder of Terraform Labs. Welcome, Do.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
So just a heads up, everyone, that when I asked Do to come on the show, he requested that we focus on new applications he's working on because he was tired of answering the same questions all the time. And since I'm doing so many press interviews for my book and I'm also being asked the same questions all the time, I actually agreed to that. We did, however, that obviously we would need to cover some basics on TERA and UST so that people wouldn't be lost and they would understand, what his project's about is and all that. But I just wanted to make it clear kind of like why this interview may not cover as much territory as I would typically cover in an interview. However, for those who want to hear more from Do, he did appear on the chopping block last week, so make sure to check out that episode. Okay, so I'm just going to start with some exposition so we can, make sure everybody's up to speed, but also, minimize the amount of time that you spend talking about this stuff. So you can feel free to tweak anything that I say. But as I mentioned before, you're the co-founder of Terraform Labs, and that has built the TERA ecosystem. And the TERA ecosystem is probably best known for its algorithmic stablecoins, such as UST, which is pegged to the US dollar. But now you have other protocols also built on top, such as Mirror, which offers synthetic assets on things like stocks, including US stocks. Or there's Anchor, which is like a savings platform, and it currently offers yield of almost 20%. But why don't we start the discussion about your main stablecoin UST, because you recently had big news about changes you were going to make about how it's being backed. And it used to be that in order to mint, say, 10 UST, you would have to burn $10 worth of Luna, which is the staking token of TERA. But obviously you changed how that works. So why don't you explain what the new system is for people?
Sure. So you need to burn $1 worth of Luna in order to do so. And then on the other side of the trade, if you're looking to redeem 1 TERA USD, you can trade it into the blockchain and get $1 worth of Luna back in return. So the idea is that Luna, as the staking asset, expands and contracts in supply to absorb the demand volatility for TERA stablecoins. We've had some pretty good success with this. So TERA USD is currently the 4th largest stablecoin in the world at roughly around $16 billion in market cap. And I think within a relatively recent future, looking at its current growth trajectory, I think it's going to be number 3 relatively soon. So we recently made announcements whereby we're bootstrapping a large decentralized forex reserve in the form of Bitcoin. So we've initially seeded this reserve with about $3 billion in assets, and we're in the process of converting all those exogenous assets into Bitcoin. And then we have plans to grow this to some meaningful percentage of USD market cap within the next year.
And why did you decide to make that change?
Well, so a couple of things. So the first is algorithmic stablecoins. So a system whereby Luna absorbs demand volatility for UST is reasonably robust, and as Luna market cap grows, is going to get more and more robust. But it also has the downside that in sort of drastic changes in demand, you could lead to death spiral situations where, the price of Luna is falling at the same time as the money supply of USD is contracting. In the beginning, when TERA was, focusing on a limited number of use cases where, the largest developer on the TERA ecosystem was Terraform Labs, which was the company that I founded. But now it's actually one of the largest ecosystems in the world. So by TVL, it is the 2nd largest smart contract platform after Ethereum. By usership, it's probably around that rank. And then the number of applications that are being built on TERA ranges from, let's say, leverage applications to options to Forex to, interest rate swaps to dog coins like Kwon and so many different things, that it becomes harder and harder to reason about the demand volatility for TERA stablecoins. There's also lots of TERA stablecoins that have been exported to different blockchains. Like, for example, UST is the largest used and the largest TVL and the most frequently used pool on Curve Finance on Ethereum, for instance. One of the largest on Saber on Solana. one of the largest on Trader Joe, on Pangolin, on Avalanche. So all combined, sort of the size of the economy that is being built on Terra stablecoins is becoming larger and less predictable. So it stands to reason that similar to how a lot of export-based economies in the real world provision forex reserves to sort of control the short-term demand fluctuations in its currency, it became a natural choice for Terra to provision its own forex reserve as well. Except, in line with what we're trying to do here, it made sense to do this in a decentralized fashion by setting up smart contracts against which people can trade in Bitcoin to mint more USD, and vice versa, redeem USD. Facebook will say it's more that, when USD is being minted, some ratio, which we don't know yet, it could be 40%, be higher or lower, would be used to acquire Bitcoin. So it's as if like USD seigniorage is being used to build up BTC reserves.
Okay, and so then that ratio will be flexible based on whatever other factors, and will it be the DAO?
Right, Bitcoin volatility.
Oh, Bitcoin volatility. And will it be the DAO that decides that ratio, or? Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
Right.
Because oftentimes, these proposals can take a while. So how flexible and quick do you think they'll be able to react to market volatility?
Well, so for example, if we build up Bitcoin reserves at around 40% of seigniorage, here's what I think about it. So first is, I think it'll take rare events for USD supply to contract by 40% in a short-term time. So at a 40% reserve ratio, I feel like we would be collateralizing more than we need to, especially because the core stability mechanism is still good. But what the Bitcoin reserves would play a part in doing is that it would prevent debt spirals, because it would drastically slow down the pace by which new Luna is being minted to facilitate redemptions. Second, I think in a long-term arc, we plan to be one of the largest, if not the largest, single wallet holder of Bitcoin, the Terra protocol itself. And I think over the long arc, the price of Bitcoin is going to do well. So I think the reserve ratio that we end up with in the long term is going to be a lot higher than the reserve ratio that we paid for at acquisition.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But then within kind of a shorter time frame, maybe like from year to year, since obviously Bitcoin can be quite volatile against USD, and also since crypto assets overall tend to be correlated with each other, how would that affect the stability of UST?
Yeah, so I would say if I were to put on my financial planner hat, the worst case would be if we were buying Bitcoin now, and then a crash happened 6 months later, and it's correlated with a massive fall in demand for UST, then we would have paid for Bitcoin that we would allow redemptions for at a much cheaper price, right? So this sort of coincidence of 3 different events coming together is going to be negative. But the expected value, so I mean, like applying probabilistic reasoning, I think, massive contractions for UST, it gets less and less in terms of the total outstanding market cap of UST over time. And I think it's not something that happens so frequently as well as, like massive drop in Bitcoin. So I'm sort of betting that the long-term scenario of Bitcoin going up and the reserves being strong enough to withstand UST demand drops is going to
Okay, that's really interesting, and it makes sense though. So somebody on Twitter, when I asked what questions I should ask you, tweeted, "Why does he feel the need to buy Bitcoin to back Luna? Shouldn't Luna be solid enough based on the services provided? It shows a lack of faith in the product." But it's more what you were saying, that you can end up in these like downward spirals, or what's your response to that?
Well, so there's an economic argument why sort of diversifying the types of collateral that can protect UST is a sound strategy. But I think the second dimension that hasn't been actively discussed is the diplomatic argument. And the reason is, so Terra's goal is to be the largest decentralized money in crypto, period. Its goal is not to be the largest stablecoin in the Terra blockchain. So we're sort of expanding into, let's say, the Solana ecosystem, Avalanche, Ethereum, Polygon. So we plan to be everywhere where there are developers and users. Now, the thing is, different from growing stablecoin demand in the Terra ecosystem itself, where trust in UST is extremely high. When you go to and expand to these different ecosystems, then faith in Luna's collateral, Luna's fitness as collateral is a lot less than what it is like in the Terra ecosystem. But if you have Bitcoin as collateral, then nobody in crypto really questions it because it is the apex asset. It has the soundest monetary policy. It has the most liquidity. So it builds valuable bridges to be able to be a more neutral asset as we expand cross-chain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But one thing is that, so if the Luna Foundation Guard or LFG is then using the Bitcoin to keep the peg and it's a centralized entity, then how does that affect the decentralization of UST?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So LFG is a vehicle that we put together in order to facilitate the initial capital formation of this Bitcoin reserve and to fund research such that we can have credible bridging options from Bitcoin to Terra, right? But ultimately, how this reserve system is going to look like is that it's going to be a smart contract which houses Bitcoin that's been bridged over to Terra, and then people can mint UST against it by depositing wrapped Bitcoin at bridged Bitcoin, and then vice versa, they can redeem UST against it, similar to how you can trade against it.
So it's similar to wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum then, where there is a centralized entity, or did I misunderstand that?
No, so we're evaluating trust minimized bridges in a way that WBTC doesn't have those properties, right? Because it's basically a multi-sig held by BitGo. Whereas for this, we're exploring mainly light client-based solutions.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, but obviously at the moment, I think bridges are just an area where there's sometimes security concerns. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on that? How to keep that secure?
I think the biggest problem with bridges now is because there is a competitive dynamic where you need to support as many layer ones as quickly as possible, right? So that leads to situations where a lot of the bridging teams can't spend time on core infrastructure because it's a land grab right now, right? So the bridge that connects to as many ecosystems as possible and facilitates as much bridging transfers are going to win because it's incredibly difficult to remove vendor lock-in once a certain bridge has a lot of market share. So which incentivizes a lot of these bridging teams to spend most of their time on integrations and business development rather than sort of making sure that the core infrastructure is secure. I think that is the fundamental problem with bridges. But having said that, that doesn't mean that there is an inherent problem with trying to build a secure bridge from Bitcoin to a smart contract platform, especially if you remove a lot of the needs for that competitive dynamic from the equation.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll have to see how that develops. So someone else was also saying that they felt that it would be disruptive to Luna to buy so much Bitcoin. So how do you expect all of this to affect the price of Luna?
Yeah, so one of the common criticisms that we heard is, well, if before you were burning $1's worth of Luna for every dollar of UST that's minted, and now we're burning 60 cents of Luna for every $1's worth of UST that's minted, then doesn't that mean that less value is accrued to Luna? And I think the answer is likely going to be no. And that's because even though the total share of the collateralization cost from minting UST is lessened through this change, I think overall we would be able to grow the pie of people that are willing to transact and hold UST across multiple different blockchains to a magnitude that wouldn't have been possible if UST only had one collateral counterparty. So by adding Bitcoin, I think we'd be able to win hearts and minds of a lot more people in crypto and a lot more users than just doing this service. So I think the overall pie is going to get larger, even though the size that we capture might be questionable.
And have you noticed that a lot of Bitcoiners got very interested in what you were doing, and maybe you were interested in participating in the Terra ecosystem because of that?
So if you look at my Twitter inbox now, it looks like the Bitcoin talk support.